welcome back to our listeners for another awesome episode. We've got another guest session today, which is really exciting for Steph and I to welcome Effie on board.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for your time, because we really appreciate, everyone's got busy lifestyles, but it's really nice for us to be coming together and offering these sessions to people that are interested. So thank you. Today, we're going to be talking about Effie's journey as a competitor and how she's now come away from the stage and what that looks like. We were just saying at the moment, it would be really hard for me and Steph to even contemplate coming away from competing, because we're sort of deep into it now. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be really useful to get an insight for the listeners to understand how that would actually look coming away from the stage, physically and mentally, probably more mentally, how that transfers into, a normal life or, continuing your health and fitness journey. So really good opportunity for us. I guess a good place to start would be hearing a bit about when you started competing, sort of how you got into it, and then as it does, it normally flows from there. So that would be really cool if that's cool with you, Effie.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so it's quite an interesting story, I suppose, from the very start. I actually went to my first ever gym. I signed up on my way back from dropping out of university. I was in the car with all of my stuff, having left my first university, and we drove past the gym. And I was like, Mum, I've got nothing else to do now. Why don't I just join a gym? And I was always really sporty when I was younger and in school. But I was kind of like, well, I'm going to have to do something with my time now. So I joined my gym. I signed up for the free PT session that you get when you join a gym. And I trained with my personal trainer, Pete, and he was absolutely incredible. And, I really got into it. And because I studied sport and exercise science, I went back to university to re-study it. I was really into fitness, I was really into health, and being in a gym allowed me to really apply all the techniques and theories that I was learning about in the classroom actually in real life. And so I became really passionate about exercise and bodybuilding style workouts. Like, I was just learning about this kind of stuff. And I spoke to my personal trainer. I was just like, hey, what's next? What can I do? Because I'm super competitive, right? Always have been, always will be. And I wanted to give myself something to really work towards. And this was at the time when bikini competitors and competitions in general were just really booming in Instagram. And you would just start to see them from, the IFBB in America. And I was just like, what is this? What are these girls in sparkly bikinis and tans on stage? I want to know more about this because they look incredible.
What year was it?
This was, so when did I actually had to look up when I first did all my competitions because it seems like so long ago. So I first competed in 2016. So this would have been, I think, maybe even 2014. Because it took me a while to gain the confidence, momentum, and muscle density to actually get into a position where I could prep. Yeah. So, I went to my personal trainer. I said, look, I'd love to do something like this. And we were like, right, this is now the goal. And so we really started to kind of get into building up a solid foundation, learning from both of our ends about what I would need to do to actually kind of really do this and do well, because you always go in with the hopes of actually doing well. And that's where it all kind of started. And I had the Ultimate Beginners UK BFF show in mind, and I was like, well, let's just try for that and see what happens. And in 2016 I started my first prep, and I went into that show and actually ended up winning my height category, which was incredible and so unexpected. I went on to compete in 2 other shows that season in 2016, of which I placed second in my second show and then top 10 in my first UK BFF British Championships, which was really exciting and such an amazing experience. Yeah. And I then decided to do a second season the year after that. So I went into a full off season with the goal of, building and trying to really increase that muscle density, because in terms of, my muscle mass, it was hard for me because I'm quite tall. So I was in the tallest height category. I'm 175 centimeters, which is 5'9". And I always found it quite hard to actually really put on dense mass. So I worked really hard at that. And then I came into 2017 and stayed with my same trainer. I then prepped for 20 weeks into the UK BFF English Grand Prix, of which I came third and earned my 3 international qualifying invitations to the Amateur Olympia in Marbella, the Finland Gold Cup, I think it's called Gold Cup, and the Olympia in Barcelona, Amateur Olympia in Barcelona, as well as the British Championships. So yeah, it was amazing. That show was incredible, and I got to compete against some amazing girls. And 1 week later, I went to Marbella. I flew out and competed in the Amateur Olympia Marbella show, and actually ended up placing 5th in my height category, which was insane. And like, some of the girls I was competing against, I'd been following for years. They were like my inspiration. And I was like, I'm literally standing next to you on stage.
In a pose.
Like trying to keep it all together. And yeah, that was just such an amazing experience. It was my first international show, so it was my first time like flying and being able to try and manage foreign supermarkets and the actual travel itself, as well as, you know, all the other kind of obstacles that come with that. After that, I actually had a really tough period between the Amateur Olympia and the Amateur Arnold show with my health. I had lots of gut issues and found it really hard to keep on chipping away and maintaining it and keeping like a good mental state of mind. And went into that show. I placed top 10, but it really wasn't my best, and it really like hit me hard. I then went into the British Championships, the UK BFF British Championships, and ended up placing 6th. And that was actually, not knowingly, my last show. So that was the whole of my competing career.
Yeah.
2 minutes.
Yeah, like you just said, if it's unknowingly your last show as well, there's not that preparation. So psychologically, that must have been crazy.
Yeah, I went into it being like, you know, I've had an amazing start to the season. Like, I looked the best I looked in my first show, and it pretty much went downhill from there. And
that does happen though, doesn't it?
I know, it's always the way, and especially when you're putting your body under such stress for such long periods of time, it becomes very hard to manage it and maintain it. And I didn't really have any time off just because of the way the shows were spaced out. It was super hard to know how far to push it or whether to just maintain, and ended up that my body just didn't like to maintain it at that weight. And that's when all the gut problems came up, and, you know, just mentally it was exhausting. And I think just that in itself meant that I wasn't in the best shape for my penultimate and last show. But yeah, the fact that that was my last show, the fact that I did place and, you know, got a nice trophy for it was, you know, great and unexpected. And it was actually just a really nice way to end it, even though I didn't know it at the time.
Yeah. And Steph, we've spoken about before, haven't we? Like peaking back to back, how tough that is in itself.
Yeah, totally. I was actually just thinking that you've had, in essence, what some girls won't get to till 3 or 4 years down the line in your first year. And so for your body to have gone through like that kind of extremity and to try and hold it, and it really being the first time it's ever felt what that feels like, is quite an interesting thing to think about, really, because it's not often that you kind of get that far that quickly, especially when you're talking up the IFBB Arnold ranks.
Yeah.
And the level that you've got to be at to be holding condition. And if the body has never been through that before, I can imagine like that would have been tough, very hard indeed. Yeah. So I want to know the next bit of the story now.
I know, it's like, oh, where did this go?
Why was it the end for you, Effie? What happened?
So interestingly, my last couple of shows, so the Amateur Arnold and the British Championships, I was actually doing my master's degree in nutrition science, and I remember writing my dissertation, and I was typing on the keys at like a second at a time, and it was so slow and my mind wasn't working, and I was trying to write this bloody dissertation and hand it in, and I think 3 weeks out before I had to like hand in my dissertation, 3 weeks out from my show. And it was just so tough. And I remember after the last show, I went into my lectures with the, you know, patchy fake tan on, absolutely exhausted, like leftover eyelash glue on my eyelashes and all of that lovely stuff. And everyone was like, what have you done? Like, what have you been doing? And I'm like, oh, it's competing in bikini bodybuilding, obviously. And and it took me so long to recover physically from it. I was so fatigued and just so mentally exhausted from, I suppose, the last 2 seasons, because it is constant and it is something that you always think about. And as you guys were saying at the beginning, like, you're so in it mentally, emotionally, physically. Your social life is about it. My work life was pretty much about it because I was studying all of this stuff. And it got to a point, it must have been like November, December of the last season that I competed in. And I was just like, okay, so now I've got to start thinking about when I'm going to prep again. And I was like, is this really something that I want to do? And I started to look at the shows for the 2018 season and all the dates, and I was working back on how many weeks I think I'd need to prep, and based on previous seasons. And it turns out that I was maybe 6 or 7 weeks away from starting a prep at this point. I was like, okay, that's fine. Like, I think I can do this. I think I want this. I even bought new shoes because I was going to be competing in the IFBB competitions where you're allowed like big platform shoes.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'd started to prepare my new bikini and like getting designs in with my designer. And I was like fully prepared to go into this. And it got to March and I still hadn't started my prep. And I kept on putting it off. Just like every week I was like, I'll start next week. And, you know, I wasn't in bad shape to the fact that I would have to start prepping, but it just got to a point. So one of my friends asked me, they were like, do you really want to do this? And I was like, I don't know. But also the fact that for me, I'm very much like, it's a hell yes or a no. And the fact that I was like, I don't know, told me that my heart wasn't in it anymore, and it would be so difficult. There would be so much resentment and like just negative energy from even just doing a prep, that I was just like, maybe this time I'll just take a break and I'll focus on my business, which I was building at the time, and I'll focus on just trying to get a bit more healthy, because I'd obviously suffered from the gut issues the season before, and I was just still trying to mentally get my love and passion back for the sport and for food in general. And that's when I decided, I was like, right, okay, I'll just take a season out. And now we are 3 years later and I haven't gone back. So
what I see from following you on Instagram and, you know, your journey now into more the intuitive lifestyle of eating and trying to fix your relationship with food and how you've evolved through that, it's really interesting to watch, you know, how you've come away from it, but then adopted similar techniques from what you've learned with regards to, you know, being mindful around food. But I guess the intuitive way is what most bodybuilders would hopefully end up doing when they do come away from the stage. Would you agree, Steph?
Yeah, I mean, I think every bodybuilder will come away from this experience having kind of a new, and we've spoken about this before, but a new way of looking at food. It's not just looking at food for enjoyment anymore. It's looking at kind of your plate and analyzing it from a macro point of view, or analyzing it from a calorie point of view. And that's ingrained in you when you start to do this sport, because essentially you're learning how to weigh foods, what, you know, this size of rice looks like, what this size of chicken looks like, etc. And you kind of have to unravel a lot of that thinking to start to be able to understand what good healthy portion sizes look like, and you can have choice, and start to have that balanced intuitive mindset again, because you lose that. And if you're not careful, that can then start to kind of install really poor relationships around food, and you can start to, well, we've seen it, you know, you can spiral the other way, where you come away from competing and you can end up with a lot of disordered eating patterns because you've now got choice. Oh my God, what's this? What do I do with this choice? And I'm sure, Effie, you kind of are now obviously doing a lot of this and speaking probably to a lot of people about how to work with that and how to find balance again and what that looks like. But it's something we must all face when we come away from the stage. And Yeah, I talk a lot about this with my partner, who's a doctor of nutrition as well, Andrew, and he's very conscious of monitoring behaviors around food, even in the off season between me and him, even as a partnership, because it can be very easy to fall back into, let's just take our Tupperware out, and it's like, no, let's not. Let's just go out and let's remember who we are. We're not just these robots that work with Tupperware all the time. Something, goes back to that sort of bodybuilding is something we do. It's not who we totally are. So it's got to be managed really carefully.
Yeah. And it depends on where you've come from as well. Like we said before, there's things like meal plans, and there's more the flexible dieting, and between Steph and I, we sort of do the two. What did you follow when you were doing your prepping and competing, Effie?
So initially in my first season, I actually did follow a meal plan. It was a carb cycling meal plan. And it was, it was my first introduction into dieting in general. I'd never really had to look at my nutrition for my sports previously, aside from more nutrition advice. Because I was a teenager, we could only really have nutrition advice given to us. And I actually rode for the GB performance squad. So we had a lot of education around food, but it wasn't ever really planned. So when I did eventually come onto a meal plan, it was pretty new to me. And my personal trainer and coach, he did understand that I knew a lot about nutrition and I was studying it myself. So we worked very closely together to find a good balance. And it actually turned out that after the first prep, we moved on to a more flexible approach and really started to find ways in which I could still enjoy food and have a more varied choice around what it was that I'm eating, but still keeping very mindful around it. And that really helped me throughout, every prep. It helped me. And even that mindset towards it and the education that I was able to gain, and that library and that bank of food that you can have, to me, off of season as well. It allowed me to still be mindful around what it was that I was eating, but understand that, it's just a different phase. I can eat more, I can eat different things now. And it allowed me to know where my limits were. Now, yes, of course, even those limits were distorted from competing as expected, but even the knowledge of that helps give you freedom in those kind of slightly disordered limits.
Yeah, because it is, although, I think all three of us would agree, we try and prep, or for you, Effie, previously, we try to do it as healthy as we can, but it's not a healthy sport. When you do get so close to the stage, you're not, what I'd class as probably healthy. There's lots of implications to things like your menstrual cycle and different things that do happen. And we're of that mindset of trying to keep it as healthy as possible. But then you do get that disordered eating, and there is elements of that. And I think it would be silly to say that that's not a natural thing that you do end up going into. It's just how you then deal with it, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think your support network is so important with stuff like this. And, also taking the time to do the research and take responsibility for what it is that you are doing, and understanding that this sport is extreme and it requires knowledge, and it requires some, perspective of what you're doing, where you're going, where you're pushing your body. And by having that responsibility and taking ownership for it allows you to be able to really do the correct research and know where to stop. And I think that's what allowed me to put a stop to what I was doing and, move on from it. It was a long journey. Like, I'll admit, it was a long journey of actually coming out the other side. And there were lots of barriers and, as you said, identities that I needed to break and move on from. And there were a lot of happy coincidences that happened in that journey. Like, my scales broke, my body weight scales broke, and I didn't fix them. I was like, this is a sign. I'm just not going to weigh myself anymore. And then my food scales ran out of battery, and I was like, I'm not going to get a new battery.
Oh, wow.
And I just stopped. And it was those little things that I was just letting go of, that was key.
When you did eventually make the decision to not compete again, did you ever have it in your mind that you may revisit it in the future? Or is it a definite?
100%. I was like, I'll just take this season off. I'll come back next season And I was still doing bikini poses, I was still sending check-in photos, like I was like, for what?
Why am I doing this?
But it's so like habitual, and it's so ingrained, and it's so much of your identity that that's who you are. When you're so wound up in it, and when everyone knows you as like your Instagram handle, like, oh, Effie Parnell, bikini competitor, it's just like, I'm so much more than this. And that's what's so important to remember.
Massively. I think that's such a powerful thing to say there, because
really?
because it is that instant visual attachment to the person, and then there's all of this other stuff that they do here as well, and it is really difficult to kind of break that when you've kind of pushed up to where you've come, you've started and people are following you and they're watching you and they're wanting to see where you get to, and then you hit this goal post and then they're like, where's she going next? And it's that kind of, you're in that zone and you get swept up in it. The people who are watching you are all involved and invested in it. Then you feel like you've got an obligation to them to make sure that you're going to like do what you need to do. And it's a real pressure pot of stuff, isn't it? It's amazing. And I think you said something there just a minute ago about really knowing yourself and why you're doing this, because that's also essentially going to be very, very important for knowing when it is the right reason to step away. Because there's so many people, and we've probably both, you girls, have known others who have done this and have kept going and going and going when they should have stopped actually a long time ago for various reasons. It could be exactly what you've just said there, Effie, gut related, health related, psychologically related, that this isn't, they've started really confident, and I've seen this in a lot of competitors, that they've just over the years got lower and lower in their self-esteem when it should be going the opposite way, and then this sort of the world that we live in now, with it being so social and so online, there's this almost social media pressure to be this thing. And you don't have to do that, is kind of where we're going with that, isn't it? Is, you don't have to bow to the pressure of everything else that's external around you if you know your why you're doing it in the first place. And I guess some people can get wrapped in the subconsciousness of it, and then before they know it,
another year goes by and another year goes by.
And we all know, like, bodybuilding, whatever category it is, it's very isolating, this sport. It's very solo, and it comes back to what you say, you need a good network of people around you. And I think it's amazing we're all three of us are sitting here talking about this right now. But when you're in it, and when you're in the gym and you're focused on that goal, and the weeks are going in and you're prep, you are like that, like you're just on a solo mission, and you do get, you build a complete narrative for yourself, don't you? Like you're this competitor doing this goal, you're ticking these boxes, this is what people expect of me, this is what I need to be doing, and before you know it, you're just like this robot thing, like that's it, just that way, and that's it.
And then it's like you get to the show and we've said it before, it's like, what just happened in the last 6
what was that?
With social sort of, I guess, your circle and your support network, Effie, I think it'd be quite interesting for people to hear about how, you've gone from potentially going to things like Body Power when it was in its heyday, and different social scenarios where you're all bodybuilders, you're all eating protein bars, you're all on this mission to the stage, what's next, to them. Have you kept those same friends, but they've sort of understood where you're at and come with you, or have you come away from certain groups?
It's an interesting question, because I feel like when you're so wrapped up in the social media network of competitors and all of that, it's very easy to connect with people who are going through the same thing. And that comes with any social interaction. If you're going through the same thing, you have something in common, some common ground that you can build off of and like create connection through. And I did that with a lot of people, and I think with some people I have kept in contact with, but purely because of the understanding and the compassion that comes with knowing when to step away. And I feel like it's almost the other people who have also stepped away that I've kept in touch with, is the people that have realized that, competing wasn't the end game for them, and they've actually also stepped away. And that's the kind of people that I have kind of stayed in touch with. And it's not to say that competitors who are still competing aren't supportive of it. Like, absolutely not. Like, I do still talk to some of the girls that still compete and some guys that still compete, but it's more the connections that kind of will pull through, that also understand what it is that you've gone through, because they've also gone through the same thing.
Yeah, because I think for me, I definitely would feel that would be quite a hard transition to. Steph and I always say about, like, I guess some of my friends that I've got from school and early adulthood and stuff, you sort of come away from that because you're doing something, like we said, so extreme, and they don't need to know about if they're not going to do it, and they know what you tell them. But then you do go into that world of befriending people that are going through a similar thing, and there's that almost unwritten rule. You don't have to explain why you're eating out of Tupperware and why you like your drink in a certain way and why you go to bed at a certain time, and all of those things that as bodybuilders we try and optimize things, don't we?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's the same story for any athlete. Any athlete has to look after themselves, have to eat certain things, have to go to bed at a certain time, have to prioritize training over social events. But the stigma around bodybuilding, and almost bodybuilders, I feel, and I certainly did it myself, play up to the stereotype as well. Like, we love to eat chicken and broccoli out of Tupperware.
Oh, yeah.
But you don't see athletes doing that, even though they're eating chicken and broccoli as well. And you kind of almost play up to it. And like, I loved being that person. I loved eating rice in my car and having pre-workout shots and all of that stuff. But I feel like the more that you can be grounded with it means that you don't have to necessarily not be able to connect with friends or family. And certainly with my family, they were really understanding and supportive, but I made it as easy for them to understand as I could. Like, more towards competitions, I would have to take my chicken and my broccoli and all of the stuff with me to family dues, but I would go and put it in the fridge, and then I'd place it up with everyone else so that I still had a plate of food. And if my mum was doing like a roast, I'd get her to roast me some vegetables, and I would have the roast vegetables with everyone else, and I'd make sure that there was still like opportunity for conversations, not just revolved around me eating out of Tupperware or anything like that. So I think there's like a two-way thing. You can't expect people to always understand, but you can help meet them in the middle. And that's where you can start to not have to, lose groups of friends or feel like you're being singled out from any kind of groups or anything like that.
Yeah, I guess it comes back to that level of ownership. Do you find
Exactly.
that well with, if you're coaching people and trying to help people understand a bit more about nutrition, do you try and sort of install that type of behavior as well, family things? And
yeah, absolutely. I think it all comes back down to this kind of flexible way of eating and looking at what is sustainable and what's realistic. And essentially, like, that's what I always spoke about when I was running my coaching business, is how can we make this realistic for you? I'm not going to ask you to go to a family barbecue and only eat chicken breast. Like, go and have ribs, go and have like steak and sausages and stuff. But it's about learning how to make the overall plan work for you. And family dues, barbecues, work dues, they're all things that you have to be able to navigate around.
yeah.
And it's different, with my coaching clients, they were very much lifestyle, general population. Competitors are obviously a completely different breed of animal.
Yeah. Because Steph, you touched on when we spoke about show day that in your off season you go for more of a flexi approach, because not only for your mental health but for relationships, how you can enjoy those periods as a competitor. And then also, we've said before, and Effie, you probably would agree, that when you then go into a prep, if you've had a bit more flexibility, when you go into prep and you need to nail it, you can switch it on. Whereas if you're doing this day in, day out, 365 days a year, it's very difficult to switch in and out of it, and you're never, ever having a break. And it becomes this, like, you're almost a prisoner in your own mind.
Yeah, 100%. I think as well, it's really important to remember that the majority of people that come in to this world of bodybuilding, unlike other sports, most people aren't coming from an athletic or sporting background, right? So they're just normal people. And I would say a very, very small percentage, and I can kind of take a small percentage of my client base, are willing to go to the extremity in an off season, if you want to call it, of a prep. That's not what they want to do. And I totally get that, because I'm a normal person as well. I mean, similar to you, Effie, I've come from a slightly more athletic background. I've come from professional dance, so I already had a bit of that inbuilt. But still, I don't want to do the rigidity all year round, because I know it doesn't provide me the balance I need myself in my own life. And when I'm working alongside my clients, I talk to them about, well, what really makes you happy? Obviously, you've done a contest prep, but you come out of the back of that, and what do you want to achieve? Because if that is continuing to do this sport, and you want to benefit your body, and you want to obviously get bigger or grow and increase in terms of getting more competitive, that's great, we can do that. But what else is going on, like, in your world that you want to actually really enjoy, because you've not had that for so long? And 9 times out of 10, I want balance. I want to be able to go to my work day and enjoy some stuff on a weekend or on this certain day, and then make smart choices through the week, but have that flexible choice. Or I really loved going for my date night with my other half on this day of the week, and so therefore we talk about that. And so nothing's off limits, but like you've just said there, Effie, it's all part of a bigger picture that's realistic, sustainable, absolutely got to be enjoyable. Because if it's not enjoyable, and you're not eating foods that you want, and you're being restrictive, and you're completely trying to push yourself into a box of sticking into something, it's not going to work. It won't work. It might for a very short period of time, but then for that particular person, they're more likely to not succeed, and then actually beat themselves up about it and create worse habits. Does that make sense? So there's so much there, and I completely agree with your sentiment on a lot of what you've just said there, Effie. And something you said that I've not really thought about, which I think is interesting, is that kind of that playing up to idea in the bodybuilding world, of the celebration of almost eating your Tupperware and eating out your Tupperware and everything else, and the showcasing of it. I've not thought about it like that, but when you said it, it makes total sense to me. And you don't see that. You don't really see that in other sports. Like, it's a really interesting one. And
it definitely got me thinking.
What's that, hun?
It definitely got me thinking.
Yeah, it's like a glorification of it. It's like it's like glorifying it in a way, isn't it? It's kind of going, check me out, I'm restricting my diet.
Do you think that what went through my mind when you said it, Effie, was, do you think it's because bodybuilding, for a lot of people, so I've come from a completely different background to you guys. I've never really excelled at any sports. I said before, I've been, good at PE. I was okay at things like drama. I get involved, but I was only ever sort of okay at everything. And then when I found bodybuilding, it was like, I can excel at something that I control.
Yeah.
And then for me, it bred into all types of disordered eating, etc. But then I definitely went through those periods of like, I'm eating out of Tupperwares. I'm part of this like community. Yeah. And for me, it bred so many different behaviors, etc. And I've now been able to sort of look at it more objectively, and winning a show and then going into the realms of that, you get that gratification, I guess. But I wonder if we do play up to it a bit, because it may be that a lot of people that do fall into bodybuilding haven't had that, been able to excel at other things before, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I think what's super important here, and it kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier about identity, is that when you do get into a sport such as bodybuilding, that does have such like a hype, hustle culture around it, you build an identity of, I am a bikini competitor, or I am a bodybuilder, when actually the actions that you are taking, you can actually build an identity that says, I am disciplined, I work hard, I push myself to my limits, I'm determined, like I have big goals and I want to achieve them. If you focus your identity around those things, then you can create such a healthy foundation to then build those actual actions and beliefs off of, rather than I am a competitor, because that only will feed those negative loops, only feed those negative thought patterns around food, around your identity, around everything it is that you do. And you get so caught up in that whirlwind of eating out of Tupperware because that's who you are. And it's just like, well, no, maybe I eat out of Tupperware because I am disciplined and I made my food earlier so that I can stay on diet, so that I can work towards my goals. And but it's completely flips perspective on what it is that you're doing. And like, that's something that I really had to work on, was that identity of like, I'm a bikini competitor versus I am hardworking. And making that switch took a while, but it then led me to have a great foundation of an identity that I could build healthy habits from, that then allowed me to be able to maintain a great physique whilst traveling, whilst building businesses, whilst, you know, going through different time zones, different cultures with different foods. That is what made me successful at that. 100%.
Awesome advice. Yeah.
It's that transition for you when your scales broke, your food scales. It'd be quite interesting for Steph and I'd love to hear about it, but for the listeners to, like, you're weighing everything and then suddenly they break, and was it just, I'm not using them anymore, or were you already going towards the intuitive eating lifestyle?
No, so when my body scales broke first, that was the first thing that broke. It just sounds like I don't look after any of my stuff, but so my body scales broke first, and I was just like, this is okay. I know this is the right step. I knew that it was the right step for me to stop weighing myself, because I knew that I should just be able to look at myself. And, you know, I was working really hard. I was loving my workouts again at that point, because I switched to more of like a CrossFit style, because I was just getting bored in the gym. I was like, right, I'm just going to do CrossFit. I'm going to get back to my Olympic weightlifting. And I was loving it. My scales broke and I was like, this is fine, because I'm feeling really good at the moment.
Yeah.
And so I just left them. And then it must have only been a couple of weeks later, my food scales ran out of battery, and I was like, oh no, this is a sign. This is a sign, and I've got to trust it, because I was not at the point where I thought that I should or could not weigh my food.
Yeah.
I was very much still like MyFitnessPaling everything, just to make sure, just to keep that kind of like mental tab on what was going on. And I think every day I was like, okay, I'll go to the shop today and I'll buy a battery. And I just kept on saying, no, you've got to do this. This is the right step for you. There was that voice in the back of my head that was like, you've got to do this. You know that you can do this as well, because you've been doing it for so long. You have such a great knowledge around food. Like, you coach other people on how to do this without the scales. Like, you should be able to do this, but I just didn't have that trust in me. And it was almost that one last anchor towards what I knew and what that identity was, of that competing identity, that was going to keep me grounded, because my body weight scales have gone. So I was like, okay, this is the one thing left that I can hold on to. And eventually they then went, and I was like, okay, so this is actually my chance to step into the lifestyle that I do want to be living, because I have chosen to stop competing, and I've got to trust it, and I've got to lean into it. And it was uncomfortable and it was hard, but I think the lessons in that were amazing. And I encourage everyone to just try it and see that the world won't end, and see that everything won't come down crashing around you. And actually, the amount that you can learn through that, and also recognize how much you have learned and how much you can trust yourself, is incredible.
That's actually a good point, isn't it, Steph?
Yeah, it's massive. It's an interesting one. I did I've been doing a couple of little experiments with some clients of mine who use a tracker, fitness watch, which we could probably do a whole episode on. But it's amazing how you start to put your control into these devices, and they start to dictate how you run your life. And you just don't see these things crop up. And I've got one particular client who I do like a watch tracker journal with, and we're doing a day on, a day off, and then up to 2 days or up to 3 days. because she's got an anxiety around the watch. And it's amazing because just the whole process of taking something out, scales out, food scales out, the tracker, whatever, starts for you to kind of open your eyes and see around you that, okay, nothing bad's happening here. It's okay. I'm in control. I actually feel okay. I'm still doing the same thing, but I'm not actually having to check, okay, I've burnt 4,000 calories today, or I've weighed my food to the gram, or I've done this. So I completely agree with you. I think, perspective is everything, and not being scared to take a little bit of ownership for some hard decisions when you are maybe putting a lot of emphasis on them, like we do in the competing world, which is weighing ourselves every day. Or of course the food is one that is a big thing, isn't it? So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think going back to a point you'd made earlier in terms of the switching the idea around your identity, and not I am the competitor, I am the hard worker, and it's my discipline that I should be rewarding myself for. It's all these things. That's a pot of gold in my mind, because I think, how do I put it, even you can start to lack or feel like you're lacking substance, or that people can't see you for anything else other than just that. Yeah. And that's something I know I've definitely struggled with, because these sort of things you're talking about, these values, if you like, the hardworking and being disciplined and focused, and I'm doing these for me, are so transferable to different areas of your life. Mm-hmm. And of course, you've gone on to do your businesses, and I feel the same about that. The competing is something you do, but all those skills you can plug in to all these amazing things that you've probably not even thought about, because you're so isolated or focused on one area. And it's a really, really interesting way of thinking about it. It's even for me, talking about it is reminding me of perspective. So I think it's brilliant to think about. Yeah, your listeners will take so much from this, definitely.
I think it's really interesting because I had to do another identity shift, which I'll just use as another example. And it was when I was running my own business. Mm-hmm. And I was actually asked to take on a full-time position within a business as an operations manager. Mm-hmm. Because I was already in this business, basically doing business coaching alongside my coaching fitness business. And they basically said, like, look, we recognize your skill. We'd love to put you in an operations manager position. We really think you can benefit, but you'll need to close your coaching business. Ooh. And I was like, oh, shit. I don't know if I can swear.
Oh, yeah, you can.
I was like, oh, shit. Like, I'm my own boss. I am my own boss. This is my baby. I am, the fitness coach. This is what I do. I have my girls. Like, what am I going to do? But this opportunity is so great. And this opportunity could open so many more doors for me. And, I spent days in bed with this identity crisis. But I was like, no, like, come back to what I had to do when I stopped competing. I was like, who am I? I'm hardworking. I'm an eternal student. I'm focused. I'm disciplined. And, I will go after opportunities when they are presented to me. And I decided to go for it. And from that, it was really hard, and shutting my coaching business was a lesson in itself. But not only did those values and skills transfer across to like this new life that I now am in, I was also able to take all of the lessons from running my own business and apply them to what it is that I'm doing now. Mm-hmm. And, it's almost the example of like, I am a CEO. It's like, that's a job title. I'm a bikini competitor. That's a sport. Yeah. Those things can break. Those things can be taken away from you at any moment. Instead of I'm a CEO, I am creative. Yeah. Like, you can find so many different ways to look at these things. And I think it's so important to stop tying your identity and like your heart to what it is that you do. It's like, tie it to who you are, like what you believe in, what you love, what you're passionate about. I think that's just so important.
Yeah, I think we can both resonate with that, Steph. Like, even, when I started my YouTube channel, I spoke to Stephen, who you know as well, Effie, my coach, and I was like, oh, you've got to think of taglines and all these things. And he was like, what you need to focus on is bikini competitors, so you can get an audience, so that you have subscribers. Then you can branch into more your own thing, but you need that sort of almost pool of followers first to then be able to be a bit more individual. And I was like, well, yeah, why wouldn't I call myself a bikini competitor? And now I'm like, God, I've done that myself.
We've all done it.
Yeah. And Steph being figure pro.
Yeah, you do, and of course it for some people it serves a purpose. In some essence, if I just take my example, my sort of tagline, if you want to call it that, is me in my business as well. So for me, it kind of that works. But the conversation you just had there again, Effie, about just being faced with an opportunity that makes you have to kind of look at what you've got and shift your perception of, if I lose this, what does that mean? And if there's so many, that's a huge life-changing shift. And it takes a lot of kind of deep work, I suppose, to kind of go, okay, I've built my baby up. What am I going to do? Am I going to just drop that and go and do this over here? But what if that falls through? And what happens there? And you do all these kind of different things, of course, analyzing in your brain. But it is a case of just completely staying true to yourself and reminding yourself that what enabled you to build that business, to do the bikini and competing in the first place, was your values that you instinctively have, and reminding yourself of those, and that no matter what path you go in, they're not going to disappear unless someone goes into your brain and starts messing around with that. It's not going to happen, is it? It's like, I think that's just such a wonderful way of thinking about it, is the external validation or the external sort of idea of what your identity isn't to do with, I guess, what you can actually apply to everything else. So it's a really interesting concept to talk about. I think you could go on lots of levels with this one.
It really is such a big subject, but we might even have people listening that are thinking about, going into motherhood
or just another business
and it's not necessarily that they're never going to compete again. And having the tools that we've all spoken about and the suggestions you've got there, Effie, it was something like potentially going into having a child. You could be really nourishing parent. You can, all of those skills, you want to work hard so your child feels loved. You want your child to feel, they're going into the right education as they grow up and things like that. It all transfers across into you can still have discipline. You don't have to label that as a title, in essence.
It's leaning into being uncomfortable, isn't it? It's facing fear. That's essentially in a lot of these areas, definitely. I mean, I had a very similar situation, although it wasn't a positive situation like yours, Effie, a few years ago, where I was running a company in a different field altogether. And to cut a very long story short, it was a very disturbing end. It came to a very short, sharp jolt, and it was as if the rug was taken from underneath my feet. I'd built it up for about 6-7 years. I was in a really good place in my sort of career, my head. And for me, what happened, I went into this complete cave where I lost complete kind of identity altogether. Like, I thought I was this person running this company, doing this job, living in this place with this person, and it was a complete short, sharp, very painful cut from something that I knew. And it was actually going right back to those values that you just kind of mentioned there, which are, well, how did you manage to do it in the first place, is essentially what got me out of that hole and started me to rebuild the things I was passionate and I loved, and actually that I realized I was doing all the time alongside it anyway. And suddenly this opportunity that what I really wanted to do was staring right in front of me. And it was such a weird thing, because I'm then here coming out of that and thinking, wow, this is insane that I'm where I am now with the same set of skills, but in a place that actually is true to my intrinsic self, whereas it wasn't kind of there. And I think if anybody's in a place where they're trying to make a decision, a lot of the things we're talking about right now are probably very valuable. If somebody's facing a choice or a decision, or even in just the bodybuilding world is trying to work out whether they want to compete or not, the huge exercise that you could do with yourself, isn't it? Just sitting in a room and kind of writing down what your strengths are and what's you know, what you've got as a person before you make those decisions and calls. And
in your why and what it is you want to achieve, you know.
yeah.
For you, Effie, stepping on the amateur Olympia stage, I'd imagine was a massive sense of achievement. And at that time when you're in it and you get that opportunity, it's like, wow, you know, this could lead on to so many things. And then evolving due to a health issue, you've had to evolve your mind to think of this very differently. And health in itself could be a massive thing for people to either, Steph, like you experienced the rug being pulled out. So, you know, say a health condition comes up that means you cannot compete again.
Yeah, it will. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and same for you, Effie, having a health condition, you probably could have carried on ploughing away for a bit, but then it would have become more detrimental to yourself. So there's two examples there that would both require an element of ownership as to understanding, you know, where you want to go and being able to come away from it and psychologically building yourself to continue, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, you know, it would be a great exercise for everyone to do, no matter what field it's about, whether it's career, life, family, competing, but just sitting down. And, you know, there's so many social media prompts out there about journaling, but it doesn't have to be journaling. Talk to your phone, like get a voice note up and just talk through things, talk with a loved one, sit and write if you'd like to write.
Yeah.
But anything to really kind of start to sit and be uncomfortable asking those hard questions. And look, no one likes being honest with themselves, because most of the time you don't like to hear the truth about what it is that you really want, what it is that you're really willing to do to get what you want.
Yeah.
And often it's not usually enough. But asking the hard questions is the most valuable thing that you can do when faced with a hard decision, because it allows you to really reflect, as you said, on what your why is, what your values are, and making sure that what it is that you're going after is in line with those values. And, you know, for instance, there are people whose goals are to win the Arnold, and that's totally cool. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But making sure that you're staying very clear-headed on what values it is that are getting you there. You know, it's not about being a competitor, it's about being disciplined. It's about, you know, being willing to go through pain to achieve a goal, like in the gym, like with nutrition. And, you know, I'm never going to say like, oh, you shouldn't compete because it's not healthy. It's just, you know, just change the perspective, change the way that you're viewing it, so that if you do break a leg 6 weeks out from a show, your world doesn't come crashing around. You're like, well, it's okay, I'm resilient, I will bounce back.
Yeah, yes. It's like, it's setting clear expectations before you do anything as well, isn't it? It's like knowing the potential pitfalls and knowing that it's not going to break you down the line. And actually going through all of those kinds of different situations that we've spoken about, every time you face some crossroad or some, you know, decision, or it's whether you've decided on a goal or whatever it is, you're building blocks of resilience every time you're doing something. And that is, resilience is, in my opinion, if you can build resilience, you can manage anything that is thrown at you. And usually that comes from some pretty hairy or tricky or uncomfortable situations that you're going to have to, like you say,
grit your teeth through
and stare at yourself in the face when sometimes it's a truth that you just do not want to admit at all, but you've got to change the record or the pattern to help you actually fulfill whatever it is you're trying to do. And I mean, I think this is just such a positive conversation for people listening who are maybe, you know, at the start of their journey as well, who think, I've got to be like this to be a bikini competitor, or I've got to think or put this post up or do this or do that, when maybe the narrative before you even begin should be, well, why do I want to do this? This means that maybe I've got a positive, healthy understanding of my competitiveness. Maybe I just want to really push myself to see what I'm capable of doing and award myself from that point of view, rather than I have to win a trophy or I have to be seen in the social media side, or, you know, these kinds of almost more external fabric stuff. Like, what's the intrinsic stuff that's actually going to make this a really awesome journey for you? So much to take out of this one, for sure.
I think as well, like you sort of just said, Steph, there, and feeding into what Effie said, when you become resilient and you endure your first prep, you realise, wow, I've got what it takes to get to the stage.
Yeah.
And then you then go into, so we've all done it, gone into a second season. And it's, well, I've been able to withstand an off season and put on weight. Then you go into another prep. And for me, certainly coming through and then getting my pro card, I then was like, well, what do I do now? And then it was, I'm going to compete internationally. I want to experience that. And then that was my driver. And then after doing that in Mexico in 2019, my prep last year at the end of 2020, Steph knows, but not many other people know, but they will now. I broke my arm 4 weeks out.
That was so bad for you.
Yeah. And even thinking about it gives me the heebie-jeebies, because it was when I broke my arm, I fell off my push bike and I broke where my arm and elbow meet. And it was incredibly painful, as you can imagine. And all I thought was, I'm 4 weeks out. It wasn't, you know, the contemplation of you might have broken a bone here. It was, well, what's going to happen with my show? And that 4 weeks was very, very, very tough. I could only train with one arm. When I trained legs, it was, you know, trying to hold one weight and do, you know, this with one arm and everything else. And also I didn't want to have any lasting damage from breaking my arm. Because, you know, if I started to lift, the doctor actually said to me, don't lift anything more than a cup of tea for 6 weeks. And I'm 4 weeks out and I'm thinking, shit, you know, how's that going to look? How can I pose? But when I look back, I remember so many trips to like walking to go and train and stuff. And all I kept thinking was, this is building character. I'm resilient. And I was so far into the prep that I didn't even come out for air. I didn't, you know, like I said, I didn't tell anyone because I didn't need to, because it's so intrinsic.
Yeah.
And I wanted to my goal was to compete internationally again and be on an international stage. And my pro debut, it wasn't actually, when I think about it, to potentially win. It was those experiences around that, going on holiday with Kieran and my mum, how that would look for me, you know, for memories and time with my family. And then I realized that competing is more than just winning a medal for me, in all honesty. And it was really, really enlightening, like not winning the show and being able to go, I didn't win the show. I actually feel okay. This is weird. You know, why aren't I putting myself down? Why aren't I really upset? Because there was so much more to that journey than getting a medal. It's even hard to talk about it because of that whole identity thing of being successful in our sport and then not winning a show. It's like, well, you know, normally the contemplation would be, well, I don't want to tell anyone. And that's, again, the same with coming away from competing, isn't it, Effie? You know, how do you tell those people that you're not going to compete again?
I think that in itself, I mean, that story is incredible. And I think that is the biggest success from any competing career.
Thank you.
Hands down. Like, that is what it's about, is about knowing that you're happy with the resilience you build, the lessons that you've learned, and you can take that on and build on it, whether that's another season, whether that's stepping away. Think of all the building blocks that you have from the experience that you can then go on and build from. Like, that's just amazing in itself. And yeah, with I guess, I feel like you feel like you have a obligation to announce these things. And there's like this movement going on at the moment about this kind of whole announcement. I can't remember what they call it on social media, but it's when you feel like you have an announcement to make, but no one actually, like, it doesn't actually matter whether or not you make it. And I feel like I was kind of at that point, I was kind of like, guys, I have an announcement to make. I won't be competing in 2018 season. I was like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I free? Why do I feel like I have to announce this? Like, I'm just not gonna say anything. And I just didn't say anything. And then I had a couple of the girls being like, you know, are you competing? You know, you look amazing. And I was just like, no, I'm just carry on. And I think I was talking to one of my old friends who I competed with the other day on Instagram, and the last time I messaged her, she commented on one of the videos that I put up on my Instagram story, and it was almost like a kind of check-in, but not really. But I was definitely not competing at that point. It was like 3 or 4 months into the season at that point, and she was just like, "Oh my gosh, you look amazing," and I was just like, "Yeah, a bit fluffy, but." And I was still using like the terminology of like fluffy, and I looked amazing in that story, like, and I was like, "Now I look fluffy," and the mindset is still so tough to come out of. Yeah, I think coming back to the whole telling people, if you have intrinsic motivation, if you have those goals solidly in your mind about what it is that you're doing and why it is that you're doing it, I don't feel you feel the need to tell anyone, because it's in here. It's not for external validation or external presence.
It's like you said, Steph, that time when you got to a show day and for the first time you looked in the mirror and you went, okay, this is where I want to be. This is what I've been striving for 8 years, or however long it was. And that moment of like, suddenly nothing else matters, because I've achieved a goal that I've been striving for so long. It's it's so intrinsic, isn't it? It's like, it can burst out of you.
Yeah, in essence, that, like, in even that moment, kind of thinking about a lot of the things we've spoken about today, that was one of those moments where you totally credit yourself to, I have been so strong to get here, and I'm so proud of that. That strength is more, it's worth 10 million times more than getting a trophy or standing on stage.
Yeah.
Like, just being like really, really present and looking at what you've managed to achieve yourself physically, if that is your goal, or like, and we can transfer this, it could be anything, it could be your business, it could be whatever you've decided to do, but really owning that at a certain point and being completely present with it. Because bodybuilding particularly, and everything we do, you're going, you never acknowledge the mini wins along the way, ever. You never like stop to go, that day I absolutely nailed it. I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, I smashed this and this, and I feel really, really good. You never acknowledge that, do you? It's always got to be some thing that you can kind of almost say, look at what I've achieved, when actually you're achieving things daily. Every single moment that you're disciplining yourself to go, okay, today I really want to, I don't know, it might be your to-do list, maybe you've got through your entire to-do list that day. That's rewarding in itself. Like, that's something you should be really, really proud of. And the same thing with that moment standing in that really grotty hotel their gym room in Miami, and I was like, girl, you've smashed it.
Oh, yeah.
I was like absolutely buzzing. That was the best moment I've had yet, like, in my whole bodybuilding career. And I wasn't even on stage, I was competing later on. I was just so happy with that look that I brought. It didn't really matter what the placing was. And I think there's just so much you can take from today's episode, and I think it's really has shone a nice reflective light on the whole process in a different way. So I mean, I've really enjoyed talking about it from this angle, because I don't think I've thought about it that way for some time. It's almost enlightened me to get back to some of my roots again with it. So I definitely hope that's helped some of our listeners think about this in different ways, for sure.
It's completely different way. I think even for people that are in the thick of competing, because the season is well and truly started now, that they could just even take away from when they come away from the stage and they're going to go back to the stage, they definitely want to continue as a competitor. How's my off season going to look? Could I delve into a bit of looking at intuitive eating more? Could they speak to their coach about it? Could, like you suggested, Effie, could you do some research into what that would look like, tying it into an off season, so that one day when you eventually come away from the stage, it's not a complete overhaul. You've practiced different food behaviors and embracing different foods and how you tackle different social situations, etc. So really useful on that. And also something else that me and Steph are almost quite passionate about is post-show. We've delved into that in previous pods, but thinking about planning how you can set yourself up for success for that period, taking in mind what we've spoken about today as well.
Especially around the identity stuff with post-show.
Yeah.
And what you've just said, Steph, about recognizing the small wins along the way. Come into your post-show and be like, right, what did I achieve? Like, what about myself made me be able to achieve those things?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I think I've mentioned this before to you, Sarah, but I do a reflective process with my clients post-show, and I get them to fill in like a whole thing from all of throughout this journey, you know, and really get them to concentrate on a big exercise, like sit down with yourself. What was the good bits? What was the not so good bits? What was really kind of a challenge for you? What were you super proud of? And what other things have you got from this experience apart from just that stage time and, you know, all these other things, exactly what we're talking about here. And it is if somebody can feel like once they've come down from the whirlwind of being on the stage, that they can really get in tune with themselves and learn, they'll come out of it more rounded. And then that post-show, like we're talking about there, will not be such a like, whoa, I've got no more goal anymore. What am I doing with my life? Like, it will start to kind of unravel other things that you can talk about. And then it starts the ball rolling with those discussions on how they want to actually enter into this next phase and how exciting that is. Because I don't know about you guys, but when it comes to, it's like a breath of fresh air coming into off season or real life or whatever you want to call it, because there's so much opportunity then.
Yeah,
it's not just this one solid goal. Like you can really start to play with things and think about different training styles. Like I love the fact that you've gone back to your Olympic lifting, Effie, and you've started to think about like, I want to have fun with CrossFit, because it's not just always about bodybuilding, you know, like you can do other stuff and still improve and change. And, you know, there's a lot to be said for variety in that post-show phase.
Feeling engaged in what you're doing rather than, like you said, Effie, weight training started to get a bit
monotonous. Yeah. And the body's probably, and like what you've just experienced, Effie, with your last season, you come away with some gut issues, but all of us have experienced this. You're exhausted. You're exhausted. The body is sore. It's like physically and mentally sore. If you've ever tried, after being through a really severe prep, to go straight back into the gym the next week, you're either like, kudos to you, but I cannot, and I have a principle now, like I actually take a month off post-show. I don't go into the gym for a long period of time, and a lot of people like question my mind on that, but for me, it is that bit of show time off. Me and Andrew both do it. It's for yoga, stretching, mobility, eating well, walking, resting the body that you've just thrashed for the last however long.
Yeah.
And Andrew always gives me this analogy, which I think is really good, which is bodybuilding is the only sport that you come straight off a stage of doing however many weeks of a severe season, and people just go straight back into the gym. If it was in Premiership football or athletics or any other sport, they have a period of recovery after they've done the big event. And that's usually, you know, a few weeks, 3-4 weeks, can be up to a month of rehab, recovery, you know, low-key training. But we have this mentality in bodybuilding where you should just jump straight back into gym the next day and just start going again. And I just think there's like a big piece around that could be spoken about as well. You know, that post-show kind of time where the body is fragile. But we'll talk about that, of course, on post-show one, Sarah, coming up.
Yeah, Steph and I are going to do a post-show one. I was thinking the other day, it's probably going to end up like part 1 and part 2.
Probably.
You know, training, nutrition, family, all the different things that come into it.
Yeah, and it's just like so many interesting ideas you can spin off and speak about it, can't you? It's just, yeah.
No, yeah, it has truly been so good. Even, you know, Steph and I have benefited from this so much. And, you know, we can safely assume that people listening should hopefully get at least something to take away into, you know, whatever phase they're entering and potentially will enter in the future. So thank you so much for your time, Effie.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It was so great talking to you guys.
Yeah, it really was a really good episode. Thank you so much for joining us.
And Effie, where can people find you? I'd imagine it's on the gram, but is there anywhere people can reach out to you if they wanted to?
Yeah, Instagram is the best place. It's FEEFFIE_Parnell, and I'll be there.
Yeah. And then same for me, Instagram, Sarah Parker Hatchard. If anyone wants to reach out, any topic ideas, anything that we've covered today or in previous pods, would be awesome to meet you guys.
For sure. And I'm just the same old as well, Steph_Noble_figure pro. So you can come find me there if anyone wants to chat.
Awesome. I shall see you soon then, girls.
Thank you both so much. See you soon.
Thank you.